Reading this morning is taken from 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 to 20. And this is the story about how Samuel, as a young boy, heard the voice of God, and he became a prophet in Israel. And Joan and I will read this together.
Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel," and he said,
"Here I am,"
and ran to Eli and said,
"Here I am, for you call me."
But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli and said,
"Here I am, for you call me."
But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again, a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said,
"Here I am, for you called me."
Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said,
"Speak, for your servant is listening."
Then the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears of it tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated by sacrifice or offering forever." Samuel lay there until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." He said,
"Here I am."
Eli said, "What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you and more also, if you hide anything from me of all that he told you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. Then he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord.
One of the biggest questions and challenges in life is trying to find out what we are to do. I remember when I was in high school, our guidance counselor told us that on average, people changed their careers 6 times. It used to be that if you were a butcher or plumber or police officer or what have you, then you did that all your life. Not so anymore, he said. So the best course of action is to get a good education so that we can adapt and switch accordingly, which I thought was a very sound advice. Then there is the deeper question of finding a sense of meaning and purpose. It is much more difficult than filling out skills and interest questionnaires to determine a specific career path. I did one of those tests in high school, and at the top of the list for me was a math or science teacher, which I was not all that excited about. In theological language, we talk about hearing the call of God or finding our vocation. I wish I could have been a professional trumpet player, but I simply did not have enough talent. God had other plans for me to discover. God calls each one of us to fulfill our purpose for being, to fulfill a mission. One of the most famous examples in all of the Bible is the call of Samuel, which happened when he was a child. Samuel was not just an ordinary child. He was the son of Hannah, who was barren for many, many years with much frustration, vexation, and aggravation. For years, Hannah prayed and prayed, and she promised to dedicate her child to God if only God would grant her a child. A child was given, a son was born, and his name was Samuel. Now Samuel, a boy, started to live at the temple, and one day or one evening, he heard a voice in the middle of the night. As chapter 3 begins, it states, the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. This means that the days when people saw the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night was very rare, as was parting of the sea. It was also rare for people to speak with God like Moses on Mount Sinai. Yet after an introduction like that, you almost expect to hear the word but after that. Another background to this story involves a priest named Eli who was getting old and he was going blind. Traditionally, his sons would take over for him, but there was trouble in the family lineage in the Holy Temple. Eli's sons were corrupt and used their status as priests and abused their powers. They ate the precious meat that was offered to God as sacrifices. Not only that, they were sleeping with the vulnerable women who had come to the temple to worship. Eli, being old and perhaps caring for his sons too much, refused, ignored, or simply did not discipline his sons. So something had to happen. So in this context, God calls Samuel in the middle of the night. Samuel, Samuel. Samuel, a boy, thought that his mentor Eli was calling him. After 3 times, Eli realized finally that it was indeed God who was calling Samuel. Eli's instruction to Samuel was for him to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Only when Samuel was truly willing and able to listen to the voice of God that God spoke of the good news that would make the ears tingle, says the Bible. The news was that Eli's sons would not be allowed to take over from their father, and there will be consequences. There will be punishment. As for Samuel, he will be a trustworthy prophet, and eventually he will be a kingmaker of David. In this story, a lot of attention is usually directed towards Samuel, who became a very important prophet in Israel. There is, however, another person whose credit is due, and that is Eli. At this point, Eli is very old, nearly blind, and he had failed as a parent. Despite his flaws, old age, and near blindness, God needed him to help guide Samuel to listen to the voice of God and prepare him to be the next prophet. So just as we are closer to Eli's age than Samuel's age, no matter how old we might be, we are also called upon by God to play an important role in life. All of us have gifts that we can give to one another to support one another in the life of our church and in our world. God still calls us no matter what age we might be. As long as we are able, I believe we have the capacity to serve, and it is truly vital that we continue to do so. On the other hand, one of the saddest things for me was visiting my father in the secure unit of his nursing home in the last year of his life. My father was suffering from dementia, and he lived out his remaining days sitting in the common room, lifeless and often asleep. It was sad to see him live without any purpose or meaning and without awareness. Especially during these pandemic times when our province is under the state of emergency, we still have the challenge to figure out how to live meaningfully. The days can be long and the days can get quite monotonous. Yet, even in our restrictions, we still have to find purpose and meaning to our endless days. So, how do we find meaning and purpose? Allow me to tell you about my uncle in Korea who was working as a veterinarian when he received a call to become a minister. With a severe cut in his salary, my aunt was quite furious as she struggled to raise her 7 children. Despite troublesome beginning, my uncle became a truly respected minister whose church grew from a tiny church to a huge church of 700 members. Through his ministry, 35 people became ministers. I asked him, "What was your secret?" His answer was that he adopted Samuel's spirituality. That is, he spent an inordinate amount of time in prayer and in silence, as he also said to God, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." While listening to the voice of God, he practiced his ministry. This pandemic has taken so much away from us. There are so many things we cannot do anymore, especially seeing our family, friends, or go to restaurants and vacations. Yet, it has given us time. At a time like this, we can, like my uncle, like Samuel, listen for the word of God. We are invited to say to God, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." What God has to say to us just might tinkle our ears. God will whisper to us words of wisdom, love, and purpose. And God will give us hope. Thanks be to God.